All right, before I show you the pour that we're going to be working on next, I wanted to show you this one. You may have seen this in the backdrop of a couple of videos, but this one here is going to be cool once I do it on the slab mill. This is fully cured. It's probably been out of the mold for probably a couple of weeks now. To give you a rough idea of the scale of this, I think we're looking at roughly 36.5 by 18.5 are the dimensions of this particular board. And so this was like, you know, there was hardly any flat surfaces on this board other than the bottom. And the bottom just was not very attractive. There wasn't much going on there. So I had this idea that I would do the bottom board that was mostly flat with wood and put that on the bottom. And then ultimately try to get this 3D effect with this. Now ultimately what we've got here is probably we've got maybe about, I don't know, probably a 1/2 inch of deep pour that is the blue you see around here. And then once I let that cure, I took it out of the mold and then I sanded all of that down with 220 to give the next pour something to adhere to. And so ultimately I cleaned all that back off. Of course, all this wood was sanded before it went into the mold to begin with. And I put it back in the mold and then I filled it up to the top area, at least as far as I wanted to go with it, with clear. So it kind of gives this three-dimensional effect. Let me grab the cell phone here and see if I can operate this little gadget right here and see if I can ultimately show you kind of what I'm talking about. Now, as you go around through here, see how you can see the side of the board? Now, ultimately, when you see this right here, this is right where the edge, my finger, this is right where the edge of the top of the epoxy is. So this is all going to be flat all the way through here. So it's going to start to expose more board as it goes around. And then same thing down in these areas right here, like the epoxy is barely just up to this level right here. So it's going to take some off the top of this and then some off the top of this area here. And then it's going to bring this part, once I slab mill it down, it's going to bring this part, down again. And so it's kind of got this really cool effect. I'm really interested to see what's ultimately going to happen in there, because there's no color down in there, that's just all clear, but then this will get flattened out. So it'll be a combination of a clear epoxy as well as wood going throughout the whole thing. So I thought I'd show that to you real quick. And when it comes time to put that on the slab mill, I'll give you guys a look at that. Now let me put the camera back over here. I've got 3 cameras going over here. And let's bring that down a little bit. And there, now we've got that side view there. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and take this out of here, and then we're going to talk about the board that I'm going to pour next. Here's the one that I'm going to do with this one here. Now, a lot of boards, like that one down there, that was straight down the middle. Oftentimes, the last one I did, I had wood on both sides with the resin down the middle. And so it just depends on the wood you're working with. Obviously, I didn't want to split this up because I really love what I've got going on here. I think this is going to look really cool. So one of the reasons that I showed you that kind of multi-dimensional thing is I'm also going to do that here. And, I want to be able to see down in the cavities of this stuff. All of this stuff has been trimmed off really good, utilizing, these tools here. I use those in this Milwaukee tool here. You can see I've got one in there from where I used it on my last project. And so I use those. I got those at Harbor Freight and they work pretty good. So anyways, you can get down through here, you can see. So this, whatever color I fill it with, I'll figure out how deep I'm going to go with that. And so this will be a 2-part pour. So I'll probably get it up to maybe about, I don't know, 1/3 of the way probably. And then from there, I'll be able to fill that with clear so that you'll be able to see all of the really cool look of that when it comes out of there. And you'll also be able to see a lot of the curvature that happens across the board down there. You'll be able to see that. Otherwise, it would just be a straight line. Let me get that out of here. Hang on a second. Otherwise, it would just be a straight line going around the curvature of that, because you wouldn't get a chance to see that because that would all be covered up with, whatever color epoxy and everything that you were using. So let's go ahead and move this camera back over here. So anyway, you get an idea of what we're going to be working with. So this is going to be really cool. I don't think I'm going to get, I'll get a little bit of effect of these little veins right through here as epoxy seeps into that. You know, and when you're looking at it, you really want to look at the board from both sides to see where you're going to get the most character. Now, if you were doing this, would you do this side or would you do the other side? That's going to be a hard decision for me because I'll be honest with you. When I look at that, this part right here has a three-dimensional look that, let's see, we'll get the cell phone camera down here again. You know, this part right here, you know, it's also got this really cool kind of three-dimensional thing where what I might do with that is ultimately make this 3 levels potentially and then fill in some of these gaps with whatever color that I do on the bottom. I got to really think about that, but I've got time to think about that because obviously for each pour, I'm going to let it set 3 days to fully cure. Now you could argue that you don't really need to do that, but I've got time. I got shelves over in the back of the garage where I can just let stuff sit for as long as I need it to, and it's out of the way and I don't have to worry about that. So ultimately, this is pretty cool here. I'm kind of excited about what's going to end up here, and so we're going to see what this looks like. So tomorrow, I'm going to do the first part of the pour. What I'm doing today is I'm actually preparing multiple molds today, so I can do all my pour in one day. So in the morning, I like to pour first thing in the morning because deep pour resin takes probably from the time you pour it, and this depends on the temperature of the room you're in. Now I have a Mr. Cool in here so I can keep my temperature in my garage at whatever temperature I want it to be. And ideally for curing resin, you know, anywhere from 74 to 86 degrees is kind of optimal, but that depends on the resin you're pouring. You'd want to look at the manufacturer's recommended temperature. Some can go down into the 60s. And so anyway, just look at the ones you're pouring. But anyway, once I pour that, before I can do anything creative with it, like if I want to put any swirls or anything else like, you know, throughout this area into here, and then maybe a little bit in there, you know, it's going to require, it's going to need to set for a while. And a lot of people make the mistake is they'll pour it and then they'll just start doing their swirls right away and say, oh, that looks so great. And then come back 30 minutes later and all those swirls are gone and you just got, you know, solid color all over again. So you want to wait until it gets like molasses, like it's the thickness of molasses, where you really got to work that in there. It'll seem like it won't settle, but it will. It'll ultimately self-level all over again, and then you'll be able to retain whatever design you put into it. But that's usually, in my experience, down here between the humidity, the temperature, the depth of the pour, anywhere from 7 to 9 hours, give or take, down here. You know, wherever you live, and depending on the conditions there, that's going to vary. But so that's why I like to pour early in the morning, so that you know, so I don't have to stay up all night trying to get the end result that I want, because I've been there, done that. Okay, so we're going to move this over to the other table over there. I'm going to get it prepared for some weights and everything, and then we're going to pour this tomorrow. So we'll pick this back up then. Okay, well, it's the next day and we're ready to pour. Here I've got some partial containers of liquid glass, deep pour, part A and then part B. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, as most deep pours are. I've got my bucket here to mix this in, and then ultimately I've got my mica powder. The first thing we've got to do, I'm going to move these out of the way. First thing we've got to do is ultimately be able to measure and see how much we're going to ultimately need. Now this is just a rule of thumb, but it's basically length times width times height. And so ultimately I've got to get an average, because as you look down through here, I've got different thicknesses, or different depth or widths, I guess I should say, depending on how you look at it. And so I've got to kind of come to an average. So one of the things I want to try and do with this, I think it's going to be unique, is try to do something with this right here. And so my thoughts are on this, and I've kind of got this in my head, and we're going to find out whether this is going to work or not, because this will be the first time I've done it quite like this. And what I'm going to do, I'm only going to pour about 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to do it in blue, as if we're simulating water, basically. And so once that cures, then I'm going to come back and then I'll sand it lightly and get it around so I can get some adhesion back to it again, clean all of that off, and I'll show you that when I do that. But then here I think I'm going to fill this section with a clear and not have any color to that, and fill the rest of it with blue as if it's got water on either side, and then it's got a little bit of a deep pool right here. So I'm going to try and do that. Wish me luck. We're going to see how this is going to work, because my thought is once I get it up to at least where I've got solid blue throughout the hole right here, what that should give me is the ability for no more, as I pour more on both sides, it should not have the ability to seep into that area, and so I should be able to top that off with clear. So we're going to check that out and see how well that works. But the first thing we got to do is figure out how much we need. And so to figure that out, you have to figure out the total cubic inches, and then we're going to convert that to ounces. Now, as you can see here, I've got, it's not the same, it's not the same width throughout here. So I kind of get a little bit of average and just kind of take a guess at it per se. I'm going to look up at the camera here real quick, and let's get that positioned to roughly where I think I'm going to want that. And then let's really start kind of see if we can figure this out. Okay, 5 inches, 4 3/4, 3 1/4, 2, 3, and then again 4. So I'm going to say on average, here I can gamble with this a little bit, because if I need to pour a little bit more, if I don't pour quite a bit because of what I'm doing, I'm not going to sweat it. But I would say probably on average we've got about 3 3/4, probably 3 3/4, because we have more down here. I don't want to quite say 4 because we've got that. So we're going to say 3 3/4. Now I'm going to just write that on here. So 3 3/4 width on that side, and let's see what we've got over here. We've got 4 1/4, 3 3/4, 3 1/4, 3 1/2. So I'm going to say 3 3/4 average over here, which is about the same on both sides. We're going to see how well that works out in a second. And then ultimately, so that is ultimately my width. Now, I got to go find my tape measure. I'll be right back. It was right there. I walked all the way around the freaking garage, and it was right there. Okay, so let's get our width again. Here again, the length of this mold is about 36.5 inches. So these two are going to be times 36.5. And then ultimately my thickness, put this down here, and it looks like we've got a 1-inch thickness, okay, times 1. So I'm going to pull my phone off here. Okay, so far, like we talked about, we've got basically 3 3/4 on either side, which is going to give us to an average of 7.5 inches of pourable width. And then we've got 36.5 in our ultimately, the width this way. I guess that's the other thing's the depth. And then we've got 1 inch thick, but I'm gonna do my calculations based upon a 1/2 inch. And one of the things I always do, in case I pour too much, is I always keep a small mold ready to go that I can just go directly into that and start pouring that mold, so I don't waste any particular resin. So I've got one of those behind me. Now, one of the things that I've got to do here is I've got to get an average of this part right here. So here we're going to have, I'm going to try and go back into the depth of that. We're going to say 7.5 inches by an average of probably 4 inches. Okay, so I'm going to do this in stages here. I'm going to start with this area right here where I've got 7.5 this way and an average of 4 that way. So I'm going to take 7.5 times 4, which will give me 30 for this one here. And then over here, I've got 7.5 total on each side, and I'm going to multiply that times 36.5. So here we're going to take 7.5 and multiply that times 36.5. And then that's going to give us a total of 273.75 here, right? Now we're going to multiply that times the depth that we're trying to go. So for the sake of this, I'm going to say a 1/2 inch because I'm not confident in my measurements, but I always keep another small mold around in the event I end up with way more than I want, and I would just pour into that particular mold, and then that'll become a different board altogether. All right, so now that we've got that, we're going to add those together. So 30 plus 273.75 gives us 303.75. And then we're going to multiply that times our depth, which is going to be 0.5 times 0.5. And that gives us 151.8 cubic inches. Now to convert cubic inches to ounces, we divide that by 1.805. And that tells us we're going to need 84 ounces total to do this, okay? So that's our calculation, and that's how we figure that up. All right. So now I'm going to figure out what percentage of a gallon is 84 ounces. I'm going to ask my phone. Hey Siri, divide 84 by 128.
84 divided by 128 is approximately 0.6562.
Okay, so we're going to use 0.65 of a gallon. So I'm going to round this up to 3/4 of a gallon, or 0.75, adding just a little bit more. Again, I've got another mold I can fill this with if I ended up having too much. So I'm going to go 3/4 of a gallon, which means I'm going to need 64 ounces of part A and 32 ounces of part B. So let's get ready to do that. All right, so here we go. Let's start adding this up. One of the things I like to do is pour the resin on top of the mold. That way I don't have to worry about spilling any. So now I'm going to fill this up. I'm going to take my glasses off so I can actually see. I know that's kind of strange for a lot of you people. But we're going to pour 64 ounces of this, of part A. So here we go. All right, it's important to get that just right. You really want to get that as close as humanly possible. I'm going to set that off out of the way. Now we're going to go into part B and pour 32 ounces. Again, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to take this up to 96 ounces. And that's going to come close to using almost all of this, but not quite every last drop. All right, let's move that off to the side. So now we have a total of 96 ounces in here. And so now it's going to be time to really kind of put the mic up. Well, I'm sorry, now is going to be the time to mix and get that mix. And this particular brand of epoxy, it's usually recommended to mix for 6 minutes. So I usually just throw in my Apple AirPods or EarPods or whatever you call those things, and listen to an audiobook. So I'm going to get ready to do that while I get ready to mix. I get to get up on a stool here, because I got to do this for you. Normally I would just put that on the ground. So let me move this out of the way. Here's another little trick. Hey Siri, set a timer for 6 minutes. She just told me. Okay, let's move my little stool out of the way. All right, well, I gave this advice in another video, but apparently sometimes I can't follow my own advice. Luckily, I got down, there was only like 20 seconds left, but guess what happened to my battery on my drill? That's right, it died. So let's get another one real quick. Now again, all my power tools here in the shop that I use to actually work are Milwaukee. I'm a huge Milwaukee fan. But I always use a separate drill for working with my resin, just because this thing has gotten resin all over it. It's really a mess, but it's stayed working and it's done a fantastic job. You just have to be careful letting that dry on there, because you can actually glue that together where you'll never be able to open up that opening there, so you can ultimately change out your bits and things. So now that we've got this mixed, one thing, I don't know if you noticed or not, but I got some little bugs in there. That's another thing too. I live in Central Florida, and there's no shortage of flying objects. And so since I'm doing a dark, a dark blue, I'm not going to sweat it. If this were tabletop, I'd spend all the time and kind of get every one of them out of there. There's 3 or 4 of them in there. 1, 2, 3 of them actually. No, 4. But they're in there, and so they're going to mix in with the mica real good. Okay, so next up, it's going to be time to mix the mica powder. This is to choice. What I've got here is some blue blood. These smaller things are a blue blood, which is a darker blue. And then I have a lighter blue, which is iceberg blue. If you can see that up there, iceberg blue. And then we got the blue blood. So I've got one of them open already. Let me see if I can get this open and see. Yeah, it's going to look good, good, good. This one here, how much have I got in there? Okay, I'm going to need to go ahead and open this other one. Let me get something to get underneath that. All right. Okay, I'm not going to make the team this year because I couldn't hit the shot. Okay, so I want to get those open, and I want to have them ready because I'm going to have very few hands, being none, because they're only going to be tied up. All right, so I'm just going to start blending and blending to taste. There's no right or wrong to this. You just don't want to do too much. For every gallon of epoxy with this particular mica powder, you can do 4.5 ounce, up to 4.5 ounces for 1 gallon. And so each one of these containers happens to be 4.5 ounces. So I'm basically going to be able to use up to about 3/4 or equivalent of that. I don't think I'll use that much. But I'm going to start with the lighter blue and then add some in there, and let's see what we get here. Okay, that probably seems darker than it actually is. See there. See that come out. So you can look down and through there. It's reasonably dark, but that's still pretty light in my opinion. So I'm going to add some more of the blue blood here. That's looking pretty good. All right, so get that out there. I'm gonna let my drill drip there for a second. And grab another bucket. I'm gonna go over to my trash can over there, and I'm gonna turn this on full power to kind of sling some of that excess epoxy off there. And then what I do after that is I just set the drill on the side of the table and move the trash can over underneath, so any resin that's on there would just drip right down into the trash can. All right, so let's get some of these things out of the way. Let's move this. I'll do the same thing with this. Out of the way, this is empty. Didn't use all this. I'm going to keep this close because I very well may need to add more. So we're going to see when we start pouring that and get an idea. Now, take a little bit on you. All you got to do is just a little rubbing alcohol. We buy this stuff by the gallon from Amazon. I can already see how some of that's going in there. This is still pretty light. So my gut tells me that I'm going to end up adding some more to it. So we're going to see here in just a second. Let's see here. Well, maybe not. That's gonna look good. Okay. I'm just gonna kind of let that do its thing for a minute. So oftentimes what happens here is you'll think you get it up to the level you want it at, but then all of a sudden it's finding every little crevice. It's going around the corners and the sides of the mold, depending on how, between the board and the mold, wherever there may be any slight gap. If your board's not perfectly flat, it's going to find that and fill that void. So you've got plenty of time. You've actually got about a couple of hours at least, 3 or 4 hours, of where you can really, you know, kind of continue to do things with this. So there's no rush. It's not like tabletop that's going to harden on you and, you know, in about an hour, really more than 30 minutes. You've got about 20, 30 minutes at most really with tabletop, of course, depending on the temperature that you're doing it in. And in a second, I'll hit this with a torch, but I want to kind of get an idea of what I'm looking at from a depth perspective. Okay, right now, I think I want more than that. It's only about 1/8 of an inch. So let's add some more here. Let's check it over here. Yep, it was about the same as you would expect. I'm going to give that a second to kind of self-level while I go get my torch. Quick story, when I was in my early 20s, I actually worked for the company that invented this. It was called Igniter Products back then, and ultimately they sold out to another company, and then they closed that particular factory there, and I had to move on to another job. But it was interesting. We would make it under our product name, but then if you sold it at Napa or Sears, then we would just silkscreen their label on there, and they would sell it for like 40% higher than what ours sold for at Walmart. But anyway, I know these things inside and out. I used to work in the repair. I'd fix ones that were broken on the line and get those back to working order so we could get those shipped out. Check that depth again. That looks good. About the same. And okay, so our depth is looking good. I'm going to show you the #1 mistake that most people make when they start doing this. And they think now is the time to do their swirls. So let's kind of go down through here and, you know, see what we're going to try and do. You know, and you can look how that looks awesome, right? Doesn't that look really good? That looks fantastic, doesn't it? So what do you think? You think we should stick with this, what I'm doing here, or should I do, you know, maybe something else? Now you notice, because blending those two blues together, notice how I've got 2 different shades of blue in here? Now let's just say hypothetically that I was happy with that. Do you know what that's going to look like in about 20 minutes? It's going to be back to solid. Don't do this. You're wasting your time trying to draw in your little designs. Actually, the more you do of that early on, if you happen to forget to go back and work with it at the right time, it's going to look like what I call like lava rocks, or I kind of call kidneys. And I think they look terrible, and I'm sure you've probably seen some before. But you've got to wait till this is like molasses. I mean, it's got to be thick, thick, thick. and I don't mean depth thick, I'm talking about like molasses, like you're stirring molasses. That's when you do it. And that, depending on the heat, the humidity, you know, and the depth of the pour, how long that takes. You know, this won't take as long as most, but if you're doing a typical deep pour, I mean, you're talking probably, you know, anywhere from probably 7 to 10 hours later is about the time. A lot of factors involved in that. So I also typically don't really worry about bubbles that much on my deep pour. That's because ultimately when this is all finished, I'm going to either plane it off or I'm going to slab mill it off. And so you're not going to see them anyway. But on this one, I'm going to have to take good close care of it because I'm doing layered pours. And so I do want to really stay on top of the bubbles on there. So I'll be coming back on this probably every, I don't know, probably every 20 minutes or whatever for several hours, okay? Remember I talked about having leftover? I've got another mold over here that I figured I'd go into. Put that right across that. And then we'll put that on there. And now we're just going to go in and pour this one. Feel that little crack there. Take a look on either side. The depth just right. Probably just end up planing some of this down. But now I'm not going to totally waste all of that resin and let that come out of there. Now, one last trick. This is going to be off camera. I apologize for that. But one of the things I do with the buckets, you want to reuse these over and over and over. They sell them as disposable, but they're not really disposable. I'll typically take a wad of paper towels and then go around and wipe the inside of it out. Then kind of take that paper towel, put it back together so I can use the other side, wipe it out. And I may have to do that twice depending on the size of the bucket. And then I'll spray it with some rubbing alcohol and wipe it out one more time, and I'm back to new again. And so that's something to consider. So that way you can keep reusing these things over and over and over. But until I'm ready to do that, I just turn the bucket over upside down and just set it down on something that's inside the trash so that ultimately I can get as much out of it before I do all that wiping down. So I'm going to move this over to another table real quick to get this out of the way, try to keep it as level as possible. Now, of course, you can use a heat gun or you can use a torch, however you want. You know what I forgot to do here? This is a big mistake on my part. Ah! I forgot to weigh this sucker down. That's really important, by the way. You're going to weigh it down because wood floats. Now my depth's going to be deeper than I wanted it to, but anyway, I'm pushing it down, not much is coming out. So because I didn't do much of a depth of a pour, it's not going to float as much. So I'm going to get away with not putting this weight on here sooner. But I'm glad I caught it now because it's kind of a big deal. And if you notice here, these little blocks of HDPE, typically they're the same thing used for cutting boards and some other things. I'll show you here, hang on. This is a sheet that I just got. I'm going to cut this down on my table saw so I can make some different sizes of these to be able to use with it, because once resin gets on this, it'll just come right off. Now sometimes if you go kind of deep in these, they'll kind of stick to the board a little bit, and just a quick nudge with a hammer, just knock it right off. These things are super, super durable. You can get this stuff on Amazon pretty easily. I get the 3/4 inch, and you're probably not likely needing this much, but we do a lot of this here. All right, so I'm going to leave my little stir stick here so it'll be available to me later. and hit this with a torch again. Now remember, if you're using a torch, don't get too close. You're going to burn your resin. So you can either use a heat gun or a torch, whatever you feel comfortable with. But don't get too close. And I don't want to forget about that one I moved back over there, so I'm going to go over and hit that with the torch real quick. So this last thing I'll say is I tend to leave this stick here in case I do. Typically I wouldn't even bring it till later, but I use it for demonstration. I'm just going to leave this here and let that part with the resin on it kind of go off and hover over the existing resin, because that's going to be what I use to test it with. And so I can come back to that and come back to that. If you are pouring and you're going up to the edges of it, you want to try not to go over the edge. It's better to take a little bit of wood off than rather try to plane down excess resin. Whether you're doing it on a slab mill with a spoil board bit, or you're doing it in a planer, depending on the size of it, resin is it's tough stuff. It's much easier to take wood down than it is resin. So if you're going to do that, go through the wood, and that way you're just taking off only as much resin as you absolutely need to. If you get in the habit of going over too much, it's going to be problematic. If you find that you get resin more on one side than you do the other, in other words, if this resin came up over the edge here, but maybe wasn't quite all the way to the lip of this one here, that basically means that two things, a combination of or one or the other. Either you didn't truly start with a flat board, and if you did start with the flat board, it was not resurfaced and flattened on the other side before it went into it. If you know you started with a flat bottom, don't worry about it if you get more on one side than the other. Just stop pouring, because that just basically means that, that wood maybe had some little hills and valleys in it, and that could have been the thing. So you're going to end up taking that off anyway. But if you didn't have a flat board, you could have your board, instead of setting flat, it could be setting like that, meaning your resin's going to go over this part too fast, as an example, or too easily. All right? All right, well, I guess I'll see you back here tonight. All right, it is way past this guy's bedtime. This took longer than I thought it was going to take. I think I poured this today, I want to say probably around 12:30 p.m. It's a Saturday here, 12:30 p.m. And right now it's about 9:15 or so. So this has taken some time. And I'll be honest with you, it's not exactly perfect timing right now. It's going to be good enough. But typically I'd probably want to wait about another 40 minutes. But hey, it's bedtime for me, and I know I can get some decent results if I go ahead and do it now. But I told you it's going to be thick. Now I wanted to tell you that I wanted to show you something over here as an example. What happens if you end up doing it too early and you don't get there? And the example I'm going to show you over here, it's actually on a 5-foot table. It's time got away from me, and I actually fell asleep and didn't make it back out to actually do anything creative within the deep pour. And I'm going to show you what you typically get. I'm going to take this over here with me, and you'll see, you've probably seen this in the background, but as you go down through there, you kind of see these little blocks and stuff. I'm not a particular fan of them, but that's what happens if you stir it early and then leave it and come back to it. So I'm going to be honest with you. Boy, that's going to look really cool when you get a finish on that. I love that wood. But anyway, move this back around. I'm getting used to this thing's not so fast. Okay. All right. So anyway, so you get a chance to see what that kind of looks like. I mean, that's not terrible, but I almost gave up on it and I was going to cut the wood down and redo it again. But I figured I'll just leave it and we'll go with it and see how it ends up at the end after I hit on the slab mill. Sometimes that can make it a little bit better. So now we're going to do this. I'm going to use this cell phone here to actually record me doing this here. And again, you want to wait till this is like molasses if you can. This is more like thick gravy. I guess it's not quite like molasses yet, but it will be good enough. Now you are going to get bubbles after you do this. So you are going to need to torch this and stay on top of it for probably about 10-15 minutes to get all those bubbles out of it. And the reason, again, it's so important to me on this one is because Let me see if I can get this to come down here on the cell phone video. On this one, because remember, back in there and other things, I'm going to pour a clear back in there. Here, probably not as much, because I think I'm going to just fill that with more blue, but I'm going to go ahead and do the swirl in there just in case I decide to ultimately go with clear on top. So that may be something I very well may do. All right, let me bring the cell phone up. You're probably going to be looking at that by the time I get to editing. And so let's get down here and let's get going with this, all right? Let's see if I can control this at the same time. Now, one of the things you want to do is really focus on these corners here and make sure you get it out in there, because ultimately if you don't, it's going to be a solid color back there. And you can see how thick that is, right? And notice again how I was able to get the two colors going. Remember, I used 2 different colors of mica powder. And there's really no wrong to this, whatever you want to do. I'll be honest with you, my wife is typically better at this than I am. It's not exactly my strong suit, but I'll probably be able to get something that's cool. I'm going to take that out and take my glasses off so I can see this better, what I'm doing. But you can already start to see all those bubbles forming. You can really get some kind of cool looks with this. And again, it's all personal choice. Whatever it is you want to end up with, and that look right there. So probably do a little something else right here. Try a little reservoir here. I go up in there because remember, this is going to be 3-dimensional. But you can get an idea of how thick all of that is. Again, the only reason I'm swirling it around the end down there is just so I don't get all that solid blue just kind of stuck back there. Once you do this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not careful. Wish my wife were doing this. She does such a better job than I do. And I just kind of keep swirling along. Let me take this down, set it down, and kind of where I can just focus on operating the camera here for a second. And we'll kind of go down through there. All right, so that's kind of cool looking. So now we'll go back and hit that with our torch. Note to self, don't put paper towel so close to where you're torching. Let's see here, did we get it all? It looks like we probably got a few more down in there. All right, so remember that side project I told you about? Let's go over to that one. I'll put that on that side. All right, so here we go. If you remember when I was gonna pour, when I had some left over, some side thing that I had there, this is that right there. So now somebody's knocking at the, come on in. You can see here where this is a little bit thicker. So you're gonna get a little bit more cool look with it when you do that. You come over here, then you can kind of get a sense of that. It kind of looks pretty cool. Here happens to be my, whoop.
Hello.
Oh, this thing's not very fast, Noah. There he is. Anyway, okay, so now I gotta get a handle on this thing. This thing's kicking my butt, Noah. Here we go. All right, now we're back in here. I think we're back in business now. You know, and so like I said, you can do whatever you want. This is probably not the best type piece to do that with, but we're gonna kind of stick with it. Put that here, reach over here and get my, oh, why don't you just do a flip-flop for me? Actually, I must have hit that. No, that's not good. We don't want that to leak out of there.
Okay, so here we are the next day, and I don't have a problem sharing with you where things that I had planned didn't quite work out the way I'd hoped. And I had a concern last night when I was doing this because I was doing it somewhat early that it truly wouldn't hold, and that is the case. That said, I still think this looks actually very, very, very cool. Now, if you notice here, this looks like it's not very deep, but ultimately what I did is I came back and I poured clear deep pour on top of that blue, and that goes to the very edge of the board. So you'll kind of get a three-dimensional, so you kind of benefit both ways. You get to see the color in the background as well as being able to see the sides of the board, and I'm going to show you another part in a second where I think it's going to turn out really cool when it's done. All right, so the next piece I'm going to show you is that center section. So I left myself just a little bit of the clear deep pour, and then from there I added just a little bit of blue pigment. Probably went a little bit darker than I wanted to, but I wanted this to kind of look like a little pool that's sitting in the middle of the board so you can see the blue underneath, but be able to see really the character of all of the various little cracks or little seams that come out of the middle part of the board. So let's take a look at that next. All right, so here I am kind of coming up on that. And if you notice, you can really look deep down in there. And I think that's going to look very interesting when it's all said and done. Let's get this from the other side as well. Here from the other side, I'm kind of coming down. I wish I didn't have that light reflecting back in there, but look at the depth of that. That looks very interesting to me. And what I may do with some of those areas that come off into the top of the board is I may do some tabletop blue in there to kind of accentuate that after I ultimately put this on the slab mill once I demold it.
Like I said, this is my son Noah here. He helps out in the garage, or I should say the artisan woodshed. You got to get yourself in frame there, Noah. The artisan woodshed. He's beginning to learn how to do this stuff. We're excited about him really learning as much. Look at me. I'm looking at the monitor over here instead of looking at you. Ultimately, we're excited about him kind of coming on board and learning how to do a lot of these things. So you'll probably see more of him as we progress on the channel. So this has been a long one. It's a long video. I think by the time this is all said and done, it's probably going to be close to 38, 40 minutes. But we're kind of taking you a journey on behind the scenes. Now, here's the deal. You know, I had lofty goals. I was ultimately going to try and do the whole thing in one video, but that'd be too long. That includes taking it out of the mold and then putting it on the slab mill. And then, of course, doing everything we've got to do for sanding to get all of that prepared, polishing, all the things that come into play, getting it ready for its final finish. So that's going to be part two, because you know, that part may not happen now for several weeks, because I think I mentioned earlier in the video, what I try to do is to get a bunch of these things ready so when I am going to do the slab mill, I spend all day on the slab mill and I can do up to 20 pieces or something in one particular day. So hopefully you found this informative. Say hello, Noah.
Hello.
You're supposed to say hello, Noah. But until next time, I don't know if you picked up his voice or not because I'm wearing a wireless lavalier. But until next time, I hope you guys have a great day and I hope you found this interesting, all right? See you soon. Don't forget to subscribe. I probably should have said that a long time ago. Subscribe to the channel. Help us out and put some comments down below. Tell us what you think about this particular video, okay? Bye-bye. What he said.
Yeah.
All right.